when people think of telepathy, they think of somebody being able to. Usually, people think of it as somebody's reading their mind. Okay, somebody's reading my mind.
What am I thinking about?
What am
Yeah.
I thinking about? And so I'd say at least twice a month I get an email from somebody saying, I have this kid, they're autistic, and I had these experiences that I just can't deny anymore. I really think, that he or she is reading my mind. And, I thought I was crazy, or this goes against everything I believe, or some people that come from, a religious background in which they're wondering whether or not this is, something to be scared of or evil, or, I get all these emails from people who they're not trying to, they're honest inquiries. They're not trying to win the Amazing Randy prize of $1 million. They're not trying to pull anything over on me. They're literally telling me stories of just these uncanny things that happen with their kid. Where like one father told me, he was like wondering, where is my, he was wondering, he's like, where's my blue shirt? I need my blue shirt. He's just thinking this to himself in his bedroom because he's wanting to wear his blue shirt. And then all of a sudden, his autistic son comes running into the room with his blue shirt and hands it to him, or another kid who the teacher who's coming in to work with them to work on the homework, who thinks the child is a mathematical savant because she can give you, just right off the top of her head, she can give you the cube root of a large number, and do all of these things that show superior mathematical mind that's not having to go through a lot of steps to try to come to the answer. And then her calculator battery dies, and so she uses her iPad instead, and for some reason the calculator on that was set to give the answer in logarithmic notation, and she glances over at the answer, and the kid who can't see her thing types out the answer in logarithmic notation. She's just like, well, wait a minute. every other thing you're giving me the answer in regular notation. Why are you giving this one to me in logarithmic notation? And the kid says, well, I can see I can see types. I can see the numerators and denominators in your head, and it's like, what? You can read my mind? Yeah, I can read your mind. Oh, well, what else can you tell me? What am I thinking now? And the kid does, it's just like, what the, and so I get these stories like this. And then it's just like, well, what's going on there? And obviously, there's information that's being transmitted. Okay. And to me, regardless of whether you believe it's something as complex as, that they're accessing the information, all the information exists in the cloud, and they're somehow, tapping into that little bit of the cloud that is connected with, this person, what they're asking of you right now and what they know, is it that, or is it that there's a frequency or a vibration that is emitted when we have a thought, that we actually emit a vibration, and we know that we emit light, and we know that we emit, we have electromagnetic signals that we emit, and we know that we also, we emit vibrations. And is it that these kids are just picking up the signal in that vibration? Either way, it's a fascinating phenomenon. And I have given it great thought. And one of the things I've been wanting to do is to study it, because I have thoughts about, and I won't go into it now, but thoughts about how to parcel out what is happening. And those are the experiments that I think are very exciting to do, to try to really understand what's happening with these kids. Because clearly there's information transfer. It's just that people will disagree in terms of what the mechanism is.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, hopefully we'll be able to talk about that in a bit more detail next time. And it makes me think as well when you say about, like vibration and things like that. We don't know how this stuff works. And it made me think of elephants, like how they can kind of communicate using vibration, and like some of the noises they make we wouldn't be able to hear it with our ears. But they are able to communicate. And so from like a layman's point of view, if you're just looking at them and they're communicating, it's kind of like telepathy, but in fact it's actual, it is vibration or frequency or whatever that's actually doing that. And I'm not saying that that's what's happening with us, but who knows if it's some kind of connection there. But obviously it's harder to work it out that way when you take into account the fact that distance and things don't seem to really make any difference with a lot of telepathy and remote viewing and everything like that.
Well, that's just it, is that the distance doesn't seem to make a difference. No. However, we can't say that every single phenomena that we see is exactly the same. In other words, I'm very familiar with the remote viewing literature that shows that distance doesn't matter. With these children, I would need to set up this experiment to see if distance doesn't matter for them, because it could be that what is happening there is yet, just another, extraordinary thing, like the person who can echolocate, that's extraordinary. Okay. But it's, so I don't want to, I can't speak beyond. You have to do the experiment and then parcel out, well, what's the difference? And then I'd be interested in what's different in the brain activity of somebody who's remote viewing versus somebody who's doing something they can only do locally. They're trying to tease apart these different things to understand.
Another chapter, which again, full of stuff I'm fascinated about. It's about telepathy and autistic savants. So yeah, this book is really interesting. Could you please talk about it and give your thoughts on Savant Syndrome and what it tells us about consciousness? I think Savant Syndrome is a really fascinating phenomenon. I had Dr. Diane Hennacy on my show as well to talk about that, and it was really great hearing her perspective. I think she's got a documentary coming out. I don't know when. But yeah, tell me about what you think about this phenomenon and what your findings were in this area.
Yeah, well, and the work that I've done in that area was connected with Dr. Powell. And so cool. She actually just lives a few hours down the road from me. Nice. And it actually relates to that same documentary you were just talking about. So essentially, I was invited to participate in the documentary looking at these autistic individuals and their reported telepathic abilities.
Yeah.
Usually with their primary caregiver, usually the mom. But sometimes it extends beyond that. And this is stuff that Diane's been looking at for years. And, you talk to her. She's been doing this for a long time. And it's another one of those areas where I was invited because I can measure the brain. And I'm like, sure. Am I an expert on autism? No. Am I an expert on Savant Syndrome? No. I barely know enough to be dangerous in those regards. But my job was to come and look at the brain. And I'm like, okay, sure. And so at this point, because we're still sort of in development of the documentary. Right. So it was more sort of pilot kinds of things, so we went out and had 3 different individuals that we worked with that Diane had been working with before and knew them. And so we went down and collected data. And the first thing I'll say is that this experience for me was completely mind-blowing. I've seen a lot of cool things. It's cool, right? When Laura Lynn pulls out your grandpa's name, and it's like, holy smokes, and gets all these facts about him and about your kids. And that's really cool. This was beyond that, because what I saw were these nonverbal autistic kids getting 100% accurate information telepathically from their mothers in all the instances that I saw. 100% right. And just one after another. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. I mean, I've seen some cool stuff, but this blew it all away. You know, we'd put a blindfold on the autistic kid and put a big, black board in between them and their parent. And, and then show the mom, like a random number or something, and show it to him, and then close the iPod real quick so that, and then remove all the stuff. And the kids just like get it every time. Wow. Nuts. I mean, the first time I saw this, literally my jaw hit the floor. I don't know what I was expecting.
Yeah.
But it was not this. And so, for me, now I appreciate Diane's perspective because, she's like, well, we need more controlled environment and we need to study this further. And, and I totally appreciate that. From a scientific perspective, that's exactly the approach that you want. If you're trying to prove that these things are real, it's got to be airtight.
Yeah.
And sitting there watching it, I'm going, there's no way this is fake. It's impossible, right? Like, this is like, I was convinced immediately. I'm like, I don't need all the controls and whatever. It's, this is real. And so if I ever had any doubts before, they were pretty much wiped away when I saw this. And so, I mean, again, you see enough weird things. And what's funny about it is how quickly you acclimate to it. The first time I saw it, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. The second time I saw it, I was kind of like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
It's like,
more
really?
Of these psychic kids. Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah. Okay. Another kid that's getting 100% right on the, okay, whatever. How could that not blow your mind? And, and so then looking at the EEG data, which I think was your original question, it was tricky because, so think about it, right? That most folks on the autism spectrum have some sensitivity.
And kids anyway, as well.
I mean, actually, a couple of them were adults.
Okay, cool.
But, so they weren't young. Mm-hmm. But, you have to wear a tight cap on your head and you have to squirt gel into 20 different electrode sites and you have to wiggle it around on the scalp and you have to put ear clips on and you have to sit perfectly still because, any type of movement creates a false signal that can be interpreted. So trying to get good data was a huge challenge. I mean, they did great, but it was a challenge. Yeah. So when I analyzed the data as best I could, it was interesting because there were some things that showed up, but it was not the same for all three of the people that I examined. So for one of them, they showed a huge increase of gamma activity in the right frontal lobe during the telepathy tasks. Mm-hmm. And so my interpretation of that, so it's like, well, okay, gamma, fast brainwave, usually means activation, among other things. The right frontal lobe has to do with attention. And so my interpretation is that this particular individual, their normal way of paying attention is probably not super focused. It's very broad. And so in order to pull something out of your mom's brain requires, this like pulling in of your attentional capacity in a very specific way, almost like a concentration meditation. but like really zoning in and to pull out that one piece of information. And so I suspect that that's why we see that big change for them. For one of the other individuals I didn't see that, but I saw big changes between the left and the right hemisphere.
Yeah.
And, usually in theta. So increased theta activity, and changes in coherence. So how areas of the brain are talking to each other.
Right.
So there's definitely some changes, but they weren't consistent with each other.
Mm.
Actually, let me real quick. I'll mention the third person because I didn't get any significant differences between baseline and when they were doing the telepathy task. And I was like,
really?
Yeah. And at first I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And then I was like, holy crap. I think they're just always
receptive to it. Stuff
they're
like
just
that.
always tapped in. They don't have to do anything different. Like the brain there's nothing to change.
Wow.
And it was like, oh, wow. All right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it actually matched what we saw because with that particular individual, we were doing random numbers again. And Dr. Powell would write down 4 digits, show it to the mom, take it away. And the person would then point to the numbers on a letter board or a number board, and because they're nonverbal. And literally, they would start pointing to numbers. I mean, we almost hadn't even shown the mom yet, and they were pointing out the numbers. Like it was like they had instant access. It wasn't like they had to go get anything. It was just automatic.
It's not like they have to sit and meditate and like give me 5 minutes to focus and like, okay. Yeah, it's just instant. Wow. That's amazing. And the fact that they were so successful is incredible. And you said that one of them there, it didn't really change. Like the kind of the baseline was the same as when, and that's really, really interesting because I guess it goes hand in hand with the idea that everybody kind of has these latent abilities, for want of a better word, but it's just everybody's kind of had, same with creativity and maths, everybody has different levels. Like there's some people out there you could say, what's the square root of 2,694, and they're going to tell you bang, like this kid with the telepathy. And some people are going to say, give me half an hour, I need to go find a calculator and a pen and paper. So yeah, wow, really, really interesting. With all of the ones that you were doing that with, did they all have Savant Syndrome, or was it autism? Was it kind of, did some of them have Savant Syndrome, or
the ones that I'm talking about right now, I don't think any of them actually had a particular savant ability outside of this. Now I know one of the things that Dr. Powell is interested in is looking at these kids and arguing that if in fact this can be proven, that this should be considered a savant ability.
Right. Yeah.
And so from that perspective, this is their savant ability. Because there's plenty of kids with autism that don't seem to have that ability.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think it makes sense to if they can show this ability and they seem to have it, then it is kind of like a savant thing, right? And in the sense that they have such a gift with it. It's so like impressive compared to the average person, but some of the things that these savants can do are incredible. Do you have any kind of personal thoughts on how that works, like where they access that information from, how that, again, I know it's just kind of speculation, but
I mean, here's what I'll say is more and more I'm sort of convinced that, I don't know if you want to call it sort of, like the Akasha or whatever you want to call it, but that there is a field of information that exists out there that contains everything.
Yeah.
And so everything is available. So the trick is just learning or unlearning, being able to connect with whatever the specific information is that you want, whether it's talking to a spirit or whether it's pulling out some sort of a square root crazy number or playing a musical instrument or telepathy, right? That all of the information is out there. And so how do we tap into it? And again, I feel like, and actually Dr. Powell talks about this. This is one of her ideas, is that language is actually part of what gets in the way. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And all of these kids that we studied are nonverbal. And, you know, as soon as you start to use language, you have limited something. As soon as you put a word on it, you've limited it. You've constrained it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it reminds me of a lot of the, you know, the world religions. You know, when you look at the primary world religions, most of them say, yeah, you can't really know God. You can't talk about God. As soon as you talk about God, you've screwed it up, because it's too big. Like as soon as you put a word on it, you've screwed it up. You've limited it. And I feel like language does that with everything. As soon as you put a word on it, you've constrained what it is and what it's capable of. So if you don't have that ability to put language on things, well, gosh, all of a sudden now there's a much wider range of possibility of what it is. And you can connect maybe to its true essence rather than some sort of analysis, or, you know, we got to get the brain in the way of trying to interpret something. You know, and in fact, if you think about a lot of mediums that I've interviewed, they will talk about the challenge of sorting through what's their own mind versus what's the information coming in.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky one, because sometimes the mind will get involved and want to interpret or want to add something on that's not what's coming through, you know? And so it's like, how do you shut that off long enough to connect to the accurate core of the information?